اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد. Praise be to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Lord of here and the hereafter. We render him praise for the greatness of his generosity and the charity of his blessing. We ask him to grant us the privilege of fulfilling his right and respond to his mercy. We convey our greeting and salutation to the Holy Prophet of Islam and his pure progenies. Sisters and brothers, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Ibadullah, awsikum wa iyai bi taqwallah. قال الإمام الحسن المجتبى عليه الصلاة والسلام: يا ابن آدم، لم تزل في هدم عمرك منذ سقطت من بطن أمك، فخذ مما في يديك لما بين يديك، فإن المؤمن يتزود والكافر يتمتع. O son of Adam, your life is in a state of decline and perishment from the moment you are born. So take from what you have as provision for the long journey ahead, because a believer sends forth sustenance and a non-believer savors the moment. I'd like to start with a few reminders. Could I ask everyone, please, to turn off their cell phone and to refrain from conversation during the khutbah, better still during the prayer. Yesterday was the anniversary of the martyrdom of Imam Hassan al-Mujtaba alayhi salatu wassalam, according to some traditions. So hence I take the opportunity of offering my condolence to the living Imam alayhi salatu wassalam and to everyone else within our community and outside. During the past 2 weeks, we've missed a few things. We had a couple of anniversaries. Number one, 16th to 18th of September 1982, if you remember. Most of the younger ones don't. But once you come to my age, then you do remember what happened. 1982, 16th to 18th, during the occupation of Lebanon by the Zionists, it was the Sabra and Shatila massacre, in which the Maronite forces, with the help of the Zionist regime, they actually went into Sabra and Shatila Palestinian refugee camps and massacred, literally massacred, old, young, women, men, for 2 or 3 days. During the days that I was teaching at the University of London, University of Denver School of International Studies, one of the professors in the department was an army officer within the Zionist troop that went into Lebanon. So we had huge conversation about this. And now the situation in Lebanon is drifting towards some kind of civil war, God help us, where all parties are equipping minor groups such as Ja'ja and others to get themselves ready. But this time, the goal is annihilation of Shia. It was not Palestinians. Those of you who would listen to so-called King Salman of Saudi Arabia in his 7 or 10 minute speech to General Assembly, where he focused on Iran and Hezbollah in Lebanon, that has to be eliminated and so on. So Hezbollah is the pretext, but this time they want the Shia from Lebanon to be completely changed, the demography of Lebanon to be changed. Now you have Turkey giving passport and citizenship to the people from the north in Trablus, and soon they would use the same excuse that they use in Syria: we want to protect the Turks. That is a justification to come in. And finally, nearly about 10 days ago, The scholars or the Shia leadership or scholarly or fuqaha, they lost one of the most outspoken as well as the free thinker within the Hawza in Qom, Ayatollah al-Udma Sani'i, who passed away nearly 10 days ago. So this is another issue, but I would like to ask everyone to take the opportunity and recite Surah Al-Fatiha. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. As I stated, yesterday was the anniversary of the martyrdom of the second Imam within the Shia tradition, Imam Hassan al-Mushtaba. In the past, we have discussed this, that Shia Muslims believe that the concept of Imamah is a divinely sanctioned position and a guided institution. Imam and Imamah in general is supposed to be a post that complements the role of the prophethood to guide the society and to ensure the divine purposes that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had intended, kuntum khayra ummatin ukhrijat linnas, it actually materializes to be fulfilled in all times and in all places. And this belief that through divine command, Ya ayyuha rasul balligh ma unzila ilayka min rabbik, the Holy Prophet appointed his cousin, Amir al-Mu'mineen salawatullah salam alayhi, as not only the first Imam, as his successor as well. And through him, there were a number of other Imams to be appointed as one coming after the other. And the list are 12 that we have hadith from the Holy Prophet. Unfortunately, what happened after the demise of the Holy Prophet and the Saqifa turned the whole thing upside down. What was the intended purpose for the community changed, and the whole plan was squashed. I don't want at this stage to go into an historical analysis of Saqifa. I think those of you who remember our classes during Muharram, we have spent some time in addressing those issues. But I want to move to a totally different issue. The derailment of the plan that the Holy Prophet had for the future of the community created its own crisis for our Imams. Instead of they taking responsibility and somehow spearheading the community towards advancement, which was the intended purpose, they moved into a crisis management mode. And as a consequence, Ahlul Bayt had to organize and prioritize a number of steps. That number one within the list of priority was the protection of Islam and whatever was achieved during the life of the Holy Prophet. That had to be preserved and protected as the primary goal. Naturally, there are other issues that they were responsible for. A number of scholars recently, I mean, when I say recently, at least in my own contemporary time, a number of scholars have spent huge amount of time debating exactly what their goals and responsibilities were. There is a tendency within the Shia that we think each Imam operated within certain parameters independent of all other Imams. These scholars say no. The strategy used by each Imam might be different depending on the prevailing condition and circumstances. But the overall parameter in which they operated under, it was fixed. The overall parameter, it becomes the preservation and the protection of Islam. How to go about and what strategy to choose. To do that, then that depends on the prevailing condition. Marhum Shaykh Sadr, rahmatullah alayhi, Shaykh Muhammad Baqir Sadr, in a book that he has regarding this issue, he says both of these Shias need to understand both of these points. Once we understand the general parameters, that general parameter should become our own priority in life. If the Imam is prepared to spend his life and sacrifice his life and the life of his family to protect Islam, then protection of Islam must be number one on our priority list. But the strategy to choose is depending on the prevailing condition. We have Amir al-Mu'mineen salawatullah salam alayhi fought with Aisha, Muawiyah and Khawarij. Imam Hassan realized that through fighting is not going to achieve anything, abdicated and wrote a peace treaty. Imam Hussein realized that it has become so critical that the society needs what we call a cultural shock to wake them out of that sleep and comfort zone that they have. Imam Zain al-Abidin, at least the first phase, realizes that we really need to focus on something else, creating what we call the political base within Islam. Because no Imam will succeed, whether it's Amir al-Mu'mineen, and even up to now we are talking about Imam Zaman and the need for 330 or 350 people that submit to the command of Imam, and we don't have it. Otherwise Imam will come back. Don't we hear that in our tradition and ahadith and so on? We are waiting. Imam is waiting for us to organize ourselves and create that minimum basic political base within the community. When somebody comes to Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq in Medina and says, Ya ibn Rasulullah, why don't you rise? He said, to do what? We have 100,000 people in Khurasan ready for you. He said, oh yes. How is their commitment to Imamah? Absolute. He said, okay, you are one of them, I suppose. He said, yes. You see that tanur over there? Open the cover, go inside. This guy stands there scratching his head and says, Ya ibn Rasulullah, tanur is fire. He said, don't you think that I know about it? He said, go inside. And then he stands back. At that moment, one of his close disciples walks in, whether it was whoever, says, the Imam commands him to go into the tanur without question, removes the cover and goes in. This guy is sitting over there, and analysis, flesh, fire, this guy is gone. Within a few minutes, he calls him, either Abu Basir or anybody else, Ya Zurara, come out. So he comes out. Dusty a bit, little bit of ash on him, but living. Then Imam turns to him and he says, how many like this guy have you got in Khurasan? That when I say do, without questioning, they do. He said, to be honest, Ya ibn Rasulullah, none. We sit in our majalis, we talk about Imam Zaman coming back, but are we prepared to be that kind of a character that when Imam commands us, sam'an wa ta'a? If not, then we have to wait. So what Imams had to do is prioritize, number one, the defense of Islam, which should be our own priority. Number two, to raise what we call the political base, individuals that could be brought up, submitting to the command of Ahlul Bayt. The final goal, whenever the situation arises, is to grab power and lead the community. Grabbing power and leading the community, we are leaving it to our living Imam to come back. But we have to come to be the political base. This is what they organize. One of the fundamental challenges that Imam Hassan was dealing with is hubb dunya. Look at his life. He organizes the troop to go and fight Muawiyah. Correct? Goes out of Kufa with the number of army. The leaders, the so-called, the generals of his army is bought by Muawiyah with bags of money. Why? Because love of dunya. The same thing happened with Imam Hussein. Ibn Ziyad comes to Kufa This Harakat al-Tawwabin that came after, within a couple of years of Karbala, it's because they fell victim or to their own ego and shaitan. He poured money in the ru'asa of Qaba'il Ashair of Kufa. Don't do anything, just stay at home. Don't do anything. Let's face it. If tomorrow you can do basic analysis, on anyone who's worked in accounting knows, net present value, go back 1,400 years ago and see how much Ibn Ziyad paid the leader of Qaba'il and Ashair, and compare it to today money. If somebody comes to you close to $500 million and comes to you and says, I give you $500 million, just sit at home and do nothing, and I'll change Islam. How many of us are prepared to say, oh, we have a responsibility towards Islam? Forget about the 500 million. We all fall victim to it. Correct? This is the reality. So Hubb dunya was one of the things that Imam Hassan as well as Imam Hussein both suffered. This is why Imam Hussein says, الناس عبيد الدنيا والدين لاحق على ألسنتهم. They pay lip service. So long as deen and religious responsibilities do not intrude in the person's comfort space. As soon as it does, قَلَّ الدَّيَّانُونَ. So this hadith that I said, Yabna Adam, I recited it, Yabna Adam, لم تزل في حدم عمرك منذ سقطت من بطن أمك. It's a way, part of a number of literature, reminds people, Muslims, as particularly the Shias, that from the moment that you are born, the life that you have is in the state of decline and perishment. And remember one thing, that there is a long journey ahead. So start taking provision. Why? Because the believer and the non-believer, the believer will take provision for the coming life, while the non-believer starts enjoying this and savors the present moment. Amir al-Mu'mineen salawatullah salamu alayhi has another comment similar to this in one of the khutbahs. تجهزوا رحمكم الله فقد نودي فيكم بالرحيل. Very sober if you think about it. وأقلوا العرجة على الدنيا وانقلبوا بصالح ما بحضرتكم من الزاد فإن أمامكم عقبة كؤودا. May you be blessed. The call for the departure has been announced if we pay attention. And so provide for your journey ahead. Remember, your stay here is transient and short. And in front of you, there is a harsh and difficult environment you need to prepare for. How many of us, on a regular basis, the concept of ma'ad and accountability in the hereafter is supposed to be one of these fundamental principles that constantly we think about it. When we wake up and when we go to sleep. If Israel comes, are we ready? 2 weeks ago when I talked about Imam Zain al-Abidin, Imam Zain al-Abidin said about the same thing. And we ignore that reality. And then what happens in Surah Al-Mu'minun, ayah 100, حَتَّى إِذَا جَاءَ أَحَدَهُمُ الْمَوْتِ قَالَ رَبِّ ارْجِعُونِ لَعَلِّي أَعْمَلُ صَالِحًا. Once death comes, says, okay, oh Lord, now that the veils are removed, I can see the reality and wastefulness of my life. Let's go back and start all over again. Kalla. It's never going to happen. The opportunities were missed. So the hadith that we have, use what we have today to build provision for the life to come, because it's a long, arduous, and painful journey. May Allah protect all of us from a life which we become forgetful of the hereafter, inshallah. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. One feels exposed in the new setting. Brother Musa is smiling. I look around. Bismillah. Those days, one side at least was protected by the wall. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. نحمده على نعمه ونتوب إليه من سيئات أعمالنا. ثم الصلاة والسلام على خير خلقه سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين محمد وعلى آله الطاهرين وصحبه المنتجبين. اللهم صل على محمد. أخواتي وإخواني الأحباء، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. عباد الله، أوصيكم وإياي بتقوى الله. قال الإمام الحسن المجتبى عليه الصلاة والسلام: من تواضع في الدنيا لإخوانه فهو عند الله من الصديقين. نلتقي بالإمام الحسن بن علي بن أبي طالب عليه السلام في ذكرى وفاته. هذا الإمام الذي فتح عينيه على الحياة في بداية الهجرة، عندما كان الإسلام يتحرك بقيادة رسول الله من أجل أن يركز قواعده كدين يحكم الحياة. وكان أول وليد لعلي عليه الصلاة والسلام وفاطمة الزهراء عليها أفضل الصلاة والسلام. وكان قرة عين رسول الله الذي قد فقد ابنه الوحيد، وانضم إليه أخوه الحسين بعد وقت قصير، ودرجا معا في حضن رسول الله وانفتحا معا على كلمات رسول الله. ونحن نعرف ما معنى أن يكون رسول الله أستاذهم الأول. ومسألة الأستاذية التي تميزت بها هذه التجربة الحسنية والحسينية لم تكن مجرد كلمة يسمعانها، ولكنها كانت كل شيء بالنسبة إليهما. ولقد كانت أستاذية رسول الله لهما كأستاذيته لأبيهما وأمهما. وغاب رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم ودرج كما كانا يدرجان في حياته في أحضان أمهما الفاطمة الذي أذهب الله عنها الرجس وطهرها تطهيرا، وفي أحضان أبيهما الذي عاش العصمة كلها والطهارة كلها والنقاء كله. ثم انطلق مع علي في تجربة من أصعب التجارب، وشاهد معا وسمع معا ورأي كيف استوعب الصدمة وكيف تسامى وترفع عن الخلافات والفتن الداخلية عندما قال: لأسلمن ما سلمت أمور المسلمين ولم يكن بها جور إلا علي خاصة. هذا السمو العلوي الذي أخلص للإسلام كما لم يخلص له أحد بعد رسول الله، وجاهد في الإسلام الذي كان عزيزا عليه أكثر مما يعز الإنسان بذاته. وعاش الإمام الحسن بعد أبيه مرحلة ولا أصعب وتجربة ولا أقصى، فلم يكن لديه جيش يحمل الرسالة، ولكنه كان يملك جيشا عصفت به الأهواء التي توزعته في أواخر حياة أبيه. وكان ما كان، وكان الحسين معه، فالصلح الحسني هو صلح حسيني أيضا. ولم يكن لأحدهما مزاج يختلف في هذا الحركة سلما أو حربا. هكذا عاش الإمام الحسن مع رسول الله ومع أبيه وأمه، فلننظر إلى جانب آخر من حياة الإمام الحسن، وهو مسجى على فراشه والسم يدب في مفاصله كلها، ويأتيه أحد أصحابه جنادة بن أبي أمية فقال: عظني يا ابن رسول الله. نعم، فقال عليه الصلاة والسلام: نعم يا جنادة، استعد لسفرك وحصل زادك قبل حلول أجلك، واعلم أنك تطلب الدنيا والموت يطلبك. الله أكبر. واعلم أنك لا تكسب من المال شيئا فوق قوتك إلا كنت فيه خازنا لغيرك. واعلم أن الدنيا في حلالها حساب وفي حرامها عقاب. واعمل لدنياك كأنك تعيش أبدا، واعمل لآخرتك كأنك تموت غدا. وإذا أردت عزا بلا عشيرة وهيبة بلا سلطان فاخرج من ذل معصية الله إلى عزة طاعة الله عز وجل. نعم، استعد لسفرك، فها أنت تراني وأنا في بداية السفر نحو الآخرة، لأنني سوف أفارق الحياة بعد قليل، وها أنا ذا أستعد له، فخذ من تجربتي ما تفكر فيه. ثم يعطي الإمام القاعدة على المستوى السياسي والاقتصادي والاجتماعي والعسكري وكل ما يتصل بحياة الإنسان في الدنيا. واعمل لدنياك كأنك تعيش أبدا، واعمل لآخرتك كأنك تموت غدا. وهذا هو خط التوازن بين العمل للدنيا والعمل للآخرة. ثم يقتحم الإمام الحسن مفهوم العزة في النفس الإنسانية ومفهوم الهيبة في واقع الإنسان. فالناس قد يتصورون العزة بكثرة الناس حول من يريد أن يكون عزيزا، تقبيل اليد، التعظيم، وبقوة السلطان لمن يريد أن يكون عزيزا. ولكن الإمام الحسن يقول إن تلك ليس عزة، لأنك تستعير عزتك من الآخرين، فالآخرون أعاروك العزة وقد يسلبوها منك. والناس عندما يجتمعون حولك ويهتفون باسمك فهؤلاء ليسوا أنت، والهتافات والأرقام ليست أنت. وعندما يكون لك صوت تلهب به ظهور الناس فهذا لا يمثل الهيبة والعزة والكرامة. والعزة هي أن تكون عناصر قوتك واحترام الناس لك في داخل شخصيتك، وهي أن يحبك الناس ويهابوك تلقائيا ومن خلال الخصائص الحية الموجودة في شخصيتك كالعلم والفهم والتواضع والزهد. إذا أردت عزا بلا عشيرة وهيبة بلا سلطان، فإذا أردت أن يهابك الناس بحيث إذا واجهتهم احترموك بشكل تلقائي، فاخرج من ذل معصية الله إلى عز طاعة الله عز وجل. لأن الله سبحانه وتعالى عندما يراك وأنت تطيعه في خط الاستقامة، تطيعه في نفسك فتحسن إليها فيما أمر الله به ونهى عنه، فإن الله يحب المحسنين، وسوف يلقي هيبتك في نفوس الناس، وسوف يمنحك العز في الحياة جميعا. وهذا أحد ما تحدث به الإمام الحسن من الكلمات المضيئة المشرقة التي تفتح القلب على الله وعلى الخير. الولاية هنا هي أن نسير حيث سار أهل البيت، وأن نقف حيث وقفوا، وأن نتعلم ما علموا، وأن نطبق الخطة التي خططوها لنا. ومشكلتنا أننا في غالب أحوالنا، ولا أتحدث في المطلق ولكنني أشير إلى ظاهرة، هي أننا فقدنا الوجه الآخر لحياة الأئمة، وهو وجه الحياة ووجه التقدم والسمو من خلال الكلمات المضيئة التي تحدثوا بها. نسأل الله أن يوفقنا وإياكم لكي نتعلم مما علمونا أهل البيت وأن نطبق الخطة التي خططوها لنا إن شاء الله. بسم الله الرحمن إنه مجيب الدعاء. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد عبدك ورسولك ووصيك وصفيك وأمينك أفضل ما صليت على أحد من خلقك، وصل على علي أمين